Beverly Hills, California, April 2009. A hedge fund manager surrenders to the FBI after running a Ponzi scheme for over 6 years, costing 20 investors over $25 million. Bad Brad, a supporting character in the film Molly's Game and in real life, had also been losing $5.2 million of investor money at underground high-stakes poker games with the rich and famous. For 3 years, from 2006 to 2009, Bad Brad sat across the table from Hollywood A-listers, billionaires, and wealthy entrepreneurs, losing hand after hand. But here's what those winners didn't know. Every chip Bad Brad pushed across that high-stakes poker table, stolen money, investor funds, Ponzi scheme proceeds. His personal bank account tells the story. Balances of $1,000, negative $2,000, negative $5,000, $0. Yet he kept playing, kept losing, and kept writing checks. August 2009, Bad Brad pleads guilty to wire fraud and investment advisor fraud. January 2010, he's sentenced to more than 10 years in federal prison. But that's not where this story ends. That's where it gets legally interesting. Welcome to the inadvertent revenge of Bad Brad from Molly's Game.
When fortunes collide with courtrooms, wealth managers, financial advisors, accountants, fiduciaries, and lawyers need real answers. Welcome to Wealth Litigated, where Professor Kelly Lease Murray, J.D., lawyer, legal scholar, and retired Vanderbilt law faculty, analyzes actual courtroom wins and losses in asset protection to deliver actionable insights that optimize your client's wealth outcomes. From explosive family feuds over fortunes to sophisticated financial fraud, each week we explore what worked to protect wealth and what exactly went wrong, so you get it right. And now, here's your host, Professor Kelly Lease Murray.
This is Wealth Litigated, delivering all the drama of true crime without the blood. We don't just tell you what actually happened in court. We also show you why it matters to your professional practice and how it impacts your clients' wealth outcomes. Let's gavel in. This is Bad Brad's Inadvertent Revenge. We're going to be talking about 3 court cases involving Bad Brad, a character in a film based on true events, and a person in real life. The first is the criminal conviction. He pleaded guilty to 4 felonies, 2 counts of wire fraud, 2 counts of investment advisor fraud, and 1 count of willful failure to file a tax return. That's actually a misdemeanor. Sentenced to 10 years in prison, ordered to pay over $27 million in restitution with almost no ability to make those payments. In the middle, the SEC lawsuit was a civil lawsuit to suspend him from ever dealing with investments again, 2 counts of violating federal securities law, fraudulent offer buying, and fraudulent purchase and sale of securities. And then the focus of today's episode, the bankruptcy trustee lawsuits. When Bad Brad's Ponzi scheme collapsed in real life in April of 2009, the hedge fund was put into involuntary bankruptcy, and a bankruptcy trustee was appointed for this Chapter 7 bankruptcy. The litigation initiated by the bankruptcy trustee is what we're going to focus on, because that trustee was suing civilly the gambling winners, the A-lister celebrities, on behalf of the Ponzi scheme victims, trying to recoup as much of their funds as possible, where the debtor in this bankruptcy was the hedge fund. What's interesting about this lawsuit, it's actually 15 separate lawsuits against individual winners of the clandestine high-stakes poker games, A-list celebrities, wealthy entrepreneurs, and others. What legal theories was the bankruptcy trustee able to bring, and how successful were those lawsuits in generating either a verdict or a settlement? We'll take a look. We have 3 sections. We're looking first at bad gambling, then the bad hedge fund, and finally the bad bankruptcy, all related to Bad Brad. Bad Brad was a supporting character in the film Molly's Game, which was based on the memoir of Molly Bloom, also titled Molly's Game. The movie, based on the book, was adapted for film by Aaron Sorkin, who also made his directorial debut with this movie, and he was nominated for an Academy Award for the script. In the movie, based on real events, certain characters certain participants in the movie were fictionalized composites of multiple celebrities, multiple entrepreneurs. Bad Brad is a supporting character in the movie, but he plays a pivotal role not just in the movie, but in the real life events that this movie was based on. The high stakes poker game, regularly held Texas Hold'em poker games, luxury venues organized by the author of the book, Molly Bloom, and allegedly illegal. Now, here's where the lawsuits filed by the Bad Brad bankruptcy trustee diverged from the events presented in the movie and described even in interviews by Molly Bloom herself. In the movie, the illegality is a very dramatic moment when her gambling operation moves from California to New York. Once in New York, the movie sets up a moment where she goes from legal, as she described it, to illegal gambling. But according to the bankruptcy trustee, the illegality happened way back when she first got her start in underground high-stakes poker games in California. Player X. This is the name of the character in the movie, and it's a composite of a number of celebrities. If you do a web search, it'll be easy to find the main celebrity that Player X is based on. Well, Player X, the main celebrity, is one of the 15 lawsuits defendants pursued by the bankruptcy trustee. In the movie, in the book, and in real life, Player X and the other celebrities who comprise Player X was really good at poker, winning from Bad Brad over $300,000. How do we know this? Because the bankruptcy trustee was trying to collect it from Player X, the real life person Player X. In one game alone, Bad Brad lost over $100,000 to Player X. Player X is also rumored to have won tens of millions of dollars over 3 years participating in Molly's game. So who was Bad Brad? There are two things to know about him. With respect to the clandestine high-stakes poker games, he was a big fish. He was someone the other players actually wanted at the table because his results were so bad. Now, was that bad skill, bad luck, or was it intentional? According to the players, he was just bad at gambling. According to certain articles and his own deposition testimony, he also had a motive to be bad at poker. But regardless, it's confirmed by court filings that Bad Brad lost over $5.2 million in these poker games. Bad Brad himself was a Beverly Hills hedge fund manager. He actually had 2 hedge funds. For purposes of this episode, we're just going to be talking about them collectively as one hedge fund. So he was a hedge fund manager who was really bad at hedge funding. He didn't invest the money, he simply spent it. And in a typical Ponzi scheme operation, he used new investment dollars to pay interest to previous investors. He withdrew over $8 million for his own personal expenses and paid over $5.2 million in gambling debts, all from the hedge fund investment funds. Bad networking. The alleged motive for Bad Brad to be bad at gambling, besides just being bad at it, was to create networking opportunities. If he was viewed as a big fish, someone who was likely to lose, and he was invited to continue sitting in on these $100,000 poker games, and he lost so much money to them, he was able to network with A-list celebrities, billionaires, and wealthy entrepreneurs, some of whom he recruited to invest in his Ponzi scheme hedge funds. Of course, they didn't know it was a Ponzi scheme, but he had investments from other poker players. Bad spending, the fraud funded by his Ponzi scheme operation. He had a lavish lifestyle, spent at least $8.7 million of investor funds, $200,000 each summer to rent a beach house in Malibu, 2 Porsches, almost $900,000 in credit card charges. And we know from the bankruptcy trustee filings that the bankruptcy trustee ultimately reached a settlement, for example, with American Express, because the funds he used to pay credit card companies like American Express were all Ponzi scheme funds illegally diverted from the hedge fund itself. And then there's the gambling debt. These clandestine high-stakes poker games that you've seen in the movie or may have read in the book, Molly's Game. The buy-in was $100,000. There's an interview on YouTube where Molly Bloom is interviewed on The Ellen Show where she talks about the buy-in was $100,000 up to $250,000. Bad Brad loses $5.2 million and the bankruptcy trustee for the hedge fund, trying to get back as much as he can to partially compensate the losses, the $25 million losses suffered by over 20 investors in Bad Brad's hedge funds. So the bankruptcy trustee is trying to get back that $5.2 million in gambling loss after discovering huge monetary transfers from the hedge fund to pay individuals like the poker players and also Molly Bloom herself. But she argued that she was a pass-through. The funds didn't stay with her. She was receiving them as the bank to pay who was owed. Now, this is a quote from Bad Brad himself, and it reflects what gambling addicts describe as their motivation. Here's Bad Brad in his own words. "I was a loser. I'm thinking like any pathological gambler. You're not keeping track of the numbers. You're thinking I'm that much closer to going on the big run. That's the juice." Section 2, the bad Ponzi. How does it all unravel, resulting in pleading guilty to 4 felonies and 1 misdemeanor and over 10 years incarcerated in federal prison? Bad Brad's misuse of investor funds is pretty typical of Ponzi schemes. He made interest payments to previous investors with the investments of new investors. He also used new investors' money to disperse cash to himself, funded his gambling activities, and paid his own personal expenses and other business expenses. Bad hedge fund. Bad Brad really was bad at investing. Under the facts available from the litigation, he didn't invest much. He networked and got friends and family to be among those 20 plus investors in his 2 hedge funds. He didn't invest their money, he spent it, he diverted it. So he wasn't good at investing, but he was good at setting up the Ponzi scheme to recruit new investment money. Overall, the Ponzi scheme covered around $44 million with $25 million lost among his friends, his family, and the high-stakes poker players themselves. What is in the victim statements and the judge's statement before sentencing Bad Brad, the shock that he was bilking people he'd known since childhood, people he was related to, people's retirement assets, people's kids' college funds, people he knew. The false accounting statements were also pretty typical of a Ponzi scheme. He was showing in his recruitment 15% to 61% returns, which his fund never generated. In reality, the hedge fund lost millions of dollars over the years, had no liquidated value, and was really only valued at $650,000 at the end of 2008, which is just 3 months before it collapsed. As part of his marketing of his hedge funds, he misrepresented the investments of billionaires, so he named names of people who were not investing, and then the collapse itself happened in the spring of 2009. His final investors and 2 investors gave him $1 million in January of 2009, and by March of 2009, there's less than $400,000 left in the entire hedge fund balance. And then the FBI gets involved. If you search online, there's a video interview on The Ellen Show with Molly Bloom herself, and this is the quote she gives when she talks about Bad Brad and his larger than expected role in the downfall of the participants in the clandestine high-stakes poker game. Because remember, he's a big fish, but a supporting character. Here's what Molly Bloom had to say about Bad Brad. The feds first found out about it because a guy in my LA game was running a Ponzi scheme. He lost $5 million in the game, and the FBI, came after all of us. That's how the celebrities got outed. That's how they found out about this game. After an investigation, he surrenders to the FBI right as the Ponzi scheme collapses in April of 2009. A recap of the 3 court cases: the Department of Justice filing 5 counts, 4 felonies, and 1 misdemeanor failure to file a tax return in the year 2007 when he had documented $2 million in income. The SEC filed a civil lawsuit with 2 counts, and then the bankruptcy trustee litigation on behalf of the bankrupt hedge fund to recoup some of the funds owed to the victimized investors. But we're going to spend some time on this timeline because Bad Brad's hedge fund collapses right around the same time that Bernie Madoff's massive Ponzi scheme collapses. 2006 to 2009, while the Ponzi scheme is operating, that's when Bad Brad is active in the clandestine poker games. December 10th of 2008, Bernie Madoff's sons alert authorities after their father confesses to the Ponzi scheme. The next day, Bernie Madoff is arrested, so that's December 11th, 2008. Based on the nationwide shock about the size of the Bernie Madoff Ponzi scheme, at least one of Bad Brad's investors contacts him and asks about Ponzi scheming. Bad Brad responds that he would never be involved in such a thing. Not only was he involved, he was bilking that investor and all the other investors at the same time. He's denying that he's anything like Bernie Madoff. March 12, 2009, Madoff pleads guilty to 11 federal felonies around the Ponzi scheme. In April 2009, Bad Brad's hedge fund ends up in involuntary bankruptcy just weeks after a lawyer letter goes out to all of the investors on behalf of Bad Brad's hedge fund that there are little to no funds left in any of the hedge funds. May 2009, the Department of Justice files a criminal complaint against Bad Brad. June 2009, Madoff is sentenced to 150 years in prison. He ends up serving 12 years in prison before dying in his early 80s. August of 2009, Bad Brad pleads guilty, and a little over 5 months later, Bad Brad is sentenced to over 10 years in federal prison. And the judge specifically referenced the Ponzi scheming, obviously influenced by Bernie Madoff, trying to send a deterrence message to others doing this or contemplating doing this, that you would receive a significant incarceration period based on Ponzi scheming. Which brings us to Section 3, bad bankruptcy. The hedge fund bankruptcy timeline is much shorter. The collapse in April of 2009, by June, the Chapter 7 bankruptcy trustee is appointed, and in 2011, 15 civil lawsuits are filed against winning poker players to recoup. The term is claw back the funds Bad Brad diverted illegally from the hedge fund to pay $5.2 million in poker game gambling losses. The gambling money trail went something like this: transfers out of the hedge fund's accounts, payments directly to these 15 individuals, including Player X. Player X received over $300,000 from Bad Brad, including $100,000 from just one hand of poker, juxtaposed against insufficient funds in Bad Brad's personal accounts. $1,000 left, negative $2,000, negative $6,000, $0. The money trail shows direct movement from the hedge fund funds to these poker winners. Now, Player X, again, is a composite in the movie. If you look at the lawsuit, Player X, the main celebrity comprising the composite of Player X, is directly sued, and he's sued for $310,000. The legal theory that the bankruptcy trustee used to sue Player X and 14 other poker winners who fleeced Bad Brad, so to speak, there was no contractual or other relationship with the hedge fund or Bad Brad. There was no value given to Bad Brad or the hedge fund to support these payments. Because as a matter of law, gambling debts are not enforceable in court. Courts will not enforce gambling debts. It's interesting that these ultra net worth gambling, clandestine poker games, oftentimes the players write each other promissory notes, but courts will not enforce those promissory notes. Check with us at wealthlitigated.com. We have another episode about a case involving a plaintiff gambling creditor, an international creditor, trying to recoup millions of dollars from a California resident, and how that fared in court. Because keep in mind, up until that lawsuit was filed, the precedent was clear: courts will not enforce gambling debts. So even if you get a promissory note, if you can't enforce it, what's it for? Maybe it's for peer pressure within the clandestine poker game community, but it generally speaking, is non-enforceable in court. That's what the bankruptcy trustee based these 15 lawsuits against 15 poker winners who won over $5.2 million from Bad Brad in the Molly's Game poker games. There's no contractual relationship. There's no value offered in exchange for the $5.2 million. The players were not authorized to receive this money. They didn't do anything for the hedge fund. They didn't contribute to the investment purpose of the hedge fund. So that's the creative basis, both in fact and law, that the bankruptcy trustee based these 15 lawsuits on. And it all hedged on one thing: were these clandestine poker games illegal? In the movie Molly's Game and in the interview on The Ellen Show, Molly Bloom herself describes the very dramatic moment in the movie and in real life, apparently, after she had moved her poker game operation from California to New York, when she went from what she described as legal poker games to illegal. And the concept is called the rake. She describes what it is, when it happened, that she went from legal to illegal. The bankruptcy trustee in filed litigation in California, bankruptcy court, disagrees with that characterization. He actually has a lengthy section about Molly Bloom and Molly's game, the facts of Molly's game, and points out that what she was doing in California required a license. She did not have a license for these games, and that even as early as her start in California, those games were illegal, unlicensed gambling. If they were illegal, then the bankruptcy trustee can claw back the $5.2 million, or at least attempt to through litigation, and that's what he tried to do. But the basis of it all is that those California games were illegal even without the rake that started once she moved from California to New York. The trustee also had legal authority to file these complaints, both jurisdiction, it's a matter core to the bankruptcy proceeding. The trustee himself had standing on behalf of the bankrupt estate of the hedge funds, and that the purpose of these lawsuits against the 15 winning poker players was to recover property fraudulently transferred from the hedge fund by Bad Brad to these winners. They were Bad Brad's gambling debts, and he had no legal authority to use hedge fund funds to compensate the poker winners. So in 2011, 15 lawsuits are filed. The lawsuit against Player X in real life sought $311,000 plus interest. The basis for recovery was 7 years, 4 years, and 2 years, and that's required legally and factually, both actual intent to defraud and constructive fraud. So the legal theory, as the transfers were made with actual intent to delay the creditors of the bankrupt hedge fund, meaning the investors, to hinder those investors and defraud those investors. Now, the 15 defendants, they're civil defendants. Gambling is a misdemeanor. No one was even close to getting indicted for their conduct simply winning in Molly's game. But the gambling winnings, you think, hey, I won fair and square if you didn't cheat, if you did win fair and square, so don't I get to keep this money? Legally, no. If someone like Bad Brad is using stolen funds to pay you. And in bankruptcy, the clawback possibility is real. This is why in the Bernie Madoff aftermath in bankruptcy, some of his investors feared filing claims in bankruptcy, feared becoming bankruptcy creditors of Bernie Madoff's hedge fund, because as investors themselves, they may have been paid by Bernie Madoff from the funds of later investors, so interest or even recouping their original investment, because some people did cash out before he was caught. That money not earned from investment of the hedge fund, but it's simply shell game redirected from more recent investors to pay older investors could be clawed back. Well, that's what's going on here, where the Bad Brad hedge fund bankruptcy trustee is trying to claw back $5.2 million paid for gambling debt to poker winners. The poker winners had no valid claim to the stolen money. They aren't responsible for it in a criminal sense, but they can't keep it civilly if the bankruptcy trustee can prove the case. Some of the weaknesses of the Player X defense and the other 14 defendants, there was no reasonably equivalent value. So they couldn't say, well, we had a contractual relationship. He owed me money. I loaned him money. He owed me money. The source of funds, again, comes from the hedge fund, which is not personal funds, but that's how Bad Brad fraudulently misused the hedge fund funds. So the source of funds is stolen money. And then the key issue is whether this was unlicensed gambling. Because if it was legal gambling, the bankruptcy trustee's cases don't work. The fraudulent transfer liability, the poker winners are not complicit in the Ponzi scheme. They didn't know about the Ponzi scheme. Some of them lost money in the Ponzi scheme. But there's no offset for losing money in the Ponzi scheme and receiving hedge fund funds illegally diverted under the Ponzi scheme, where Bad Brad is using the hedge fund to pay his personal gambling debts. So this fraudulent transfer, they can't keep the money if there isn't a contractual reason. Now, Molly Bloom herself was also named by the bankruptcy trustee, but she has a better argument to avoid this theory, because the way she describes her services setting up the games, concierge services, all of those things, she did offer value that Bad Brad enjoyed. And so she may have had more of a value-given argument than simply gambling winnings at unlicensed gambling. So her status as a non-gambler running the events gave her a little more legal defense than the other 15 had. And this is the quote from one of the winning poker players after the 15 poker winners were sued by Bad Brad's bankruptcy trustee while Bad Brad himself was in jail. The irony of it all is that the game finally found the biggest fish ever, Bad Brad, and we did our best to bury him every week. Now those who fleeced him of millions are embroiled in this lawsuit. It's like he turned the tables on us with no skill, just sheer stupidity. So what was the result? The result was the bankruptcy trustee settled with all 15 civil defendants for about a third of what was sought. So Player X was sued for over $300,000. He settled for $88,000. And the bankruptcy judge goes through the pros and the cons of pursuing the litigation and not settling. So the bankruptcy judge approved these settlements, but it wasn't $5.2 million. It's about a third of what was sought. And some of the defendants are names, well-known names. And if you're interested in who's actually involved, we include in the show notes and on our website more information about the case names and the citations so you can have a look. Some of the cases we're covering on the Wealth Litigated podcast, the financial missteps that snowball into financial disasters start from gambling. Client gambling activities, including high stakes, 100,000, ultra high stakes, 7-figure gambling events, really adds up even among high wealth individuals. Insufficient personal funds to cover lifestyle, to cover gambling debts, transfers from business accounts for personal obligations or transfers from business accounts for gambling debt obligations, negative account balances. Those facts all relate to the Bad Brad circumstance, but they're common among others who experience. We wrap up with the wealth protection lessons. The legal risks, let's invert it. The legal risks were for the gambling winners, the poker winners. Now, normally when you win at a friendly game of poker, you think you get to keep the money. And they would have if Bad Brad had used personal funds. So the inadvertent revenge here is that Bad Brad paid them with stolen money, illegally diverted funds from his hedge funds that once the bankruptcy trustee took over, could file litigation and did against 15 poker winners. So that is the basis of the Bad Brad inadvertent revenge, because he's in jail at the time these lawsuits even happen. And then ultimately the due diligence to verify source of client funds and document legitimate business purposes for substantial transfers. Thank you for joining us. Stay tuned for a preview of our next episode.
When a $7 million adultery penalty or bad boy clause collided with a second affair, 3 Maryland courts had to decide, can you legally penalize adultery in a post-nuptial agreement? Husband inherited $10 million. After his first affair, he signed the agreement against legal advice, even increasing the adultery penalty himself from $5 to $7 million. Then, he cheated again. This episode analyzes the Lloyd case from the Maryland Supreme Court, where inherited wealth, marital infidelity, and contract law created a high-stakes legal battle that redefined asset protection strategies. Join us for How Bunny Mellon's grandson bet his fortune on fidelity, episode 102 of the Wealth Litigated podcast, delivering all the drama of true crime without the blood.
This is Wealth Litigated, where the real courtroom battles we analyze today are your roadmap to stronger asset protection and better wealth outcomes. Follow us on your favorite podcast platform or subscribe on YouTube so you never miss a weekly episode. Questions or cases? Visit wealthlitigated.com/questions. This show is for informational and educational purposes only and does not constitute legal, tax, or financial advice. No attorney-client relationship is formed. Consult a qualified professional for advice specific to your situation and jurisdiction. Wealth Litigated is now adjourned.